Now, Kent, did you say that there's a higher chance that the teams will miss on these players if they are the smaller type of receivers?
I specifically the small speedsters, the guys that
Yeah.
are under maybe like 185, so maybe 180 and below,
So like Worthy.
and really
Yeah.
fast. Those guys, there's a couple that hit, but they generally fall into a very limited bucket where even if they hit, they're going to be, kind of good, but not necessarily great receivers. And a lot of these guys get compared to Deshaun Jackson, who for much of his career was like that. He
Yeah.
wasn't this premier receiver. His speed was a huge deal, and as a returner, he was phenomenal. But as a receiver, he got good numbers, but rarely great numbers because it's a limited role. There's only so many times you can throw deep in the NFL. Teams start to pay attention to when you're doing it. They play your offense differently. They start to put guys deep. They start to cover guys more. They start jamming at the line more. They can make it more difficult for those types of guys. It's a lot easier to shut down your huge athletic wonderkin types, your Calvin Johnsons and Julio Jones and Andre Johnsons and those type of guys. Those guys are so hard to shut down because, yeah, you shut them down deep. I don't care. I can still run crossers and beat you, and I can run comebacks and beat you. I can get jump balls and beat you. Those guys have so many different ways they can win. If you can get a guy like that, you can win far more often than not. If you get a guy that's great at one thing or a couple of things, not everything, but just a couple of things, you're still pretty good at getting around the types of defenses that they throw at you. Because even if you have a scheme that, okay, if they're going to cover me deep, I'm going to have this underneath route. If they cover the underneath route, I'm going to have this post that I can run. It's easier to do that when you have a guy who can do a couple of things. When you have a guy that can only really do one thing, they're much easier to shut down. And one of the other big downsides to those smaller speedster types is generally they only have the one thing. It's been a running gag for me when we start talking about these guys every year because every year one of those guys comes out, and every year it's like he's not just a speed guy, right? He can do all these other things, and you put on the tape, and 99% of it is speed. It's just speed. And it's like, I really don't care that he can do this on 1% of his snaps. Like, he's probably not going to do that in the NFL. And most of the time, that's the case. Not always. There are a couple. I don't want to dissuade from taking guys that are able to do it. You don't want to look at everybody and put them all under this umbrella. But it is a tendency to have those types of guys and have them struggle.
I'm glad this came up because I think this is the crux of where we're at right now. Not only for this show, but for the real life Bills as well, as we're trying to find that perfect wide receiver. Because Kevin and I were going to bring this up because we did a quick mock draft before he came on, and we were going based on the RAS scores. We said, okay, let's try to find guys who tested really well for the sake of this episode tonight. So we took Xavier Worthy at pick 28 for the Bills, but I'm a big Xavier Legette guy because I told Kevin, I said, okay, for this, we can go with Worthy because he's the best player available on the board. He tested very well, and we haven't really talked about it much. So I think it's a good talking point. But I'm very concerned that he only weighs 165 pounds because he is what you were just talking about, that smaller, speedy guy who doesn't have many ways to win other than with getting down the field with that burst. And I think the Bills are trying to replace Diggs and Davis. So you're going to want an all-around receiver, someone who can block, someone who has that contact balance. So for me, I would probably pick someone like Xavier Legette because he has that size. He has that freakish athleticism to him. And like to me, he reminds me of A.J. Brown and D.K. Metcalf. So if it were up to you, based on your testing and your formulations here, who do you like more specifically for the Bills, Xavier Worthy or Xavier Legette?
It comes down to Legette for me for all of the reasons that you mentioned. Really, you got a guy that's bigger. He's more likely to be able to take some of those hits or box guys out with his body. That's something that Worthy's never going to be able to do. Even if you get past the weight, he's just a small guy, right? He's never going to really be able to use his size to create separation. It's always going to be his speed and his quickness and his explosiveness. And those are great traits. Don't get me wrong. Those are great traits to have. If you can have them, have them. But Legette has those, and he's also bigger. So it's not that he's missing something and Worthy has that. He's got the same types of traits. He doesn't have that all-world speed, but there's a million studies that people have run showing that the fastest players in the NFL don't really succeed long-term. And they look at guys like Jerry Rice and that fake 40 time that always gets thrown around for him. They do it with Larry Fitzgerald too. If people like to say that he ran in the 4.7s, he didn't. He ran a 4.5, a 4.49. I think Jerry Rice ran a 4.59, if I remember Bill Walsh saying. But they didn't run 4.2, right? They weren't super speedsters. They're fast, but not elite tier speed. So if you want a guy with that kind of speed, you can do a lot of stuff with them. And there are things that you can do with those speedsters that you can't do with anybody else. But Legette's not slow. Like, he ran a 4.39. He's got plenty of speed. That's a 95th percentile run. You know, he's got plenty of speed to do that kind of stuff. You can still do pretty much everything you want to do with Worthy with Legette. You can't do everything you can do with Legette with Worthy.